The glass towers of downtown sparkled like diamonds against the evening sky. Among them stood the Whitmore Corporation building, 30 floors of pure luxury that screamed success from every polished surface. The lobby alone cost more than most. People would see in a lifetime, with marble floors so shiny you could fix your hair in them and crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow patterns across the walls. Maria Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart through the service entrance, just like she had every night for the past 8 years. Her uniform was pressed and clean, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She took pride in her work, even if others didn't always see it that way. Tonight was different, though. Walking beside her was her 12-year-old daughter, Sophia, clutching a worn backpack and looking around with wide eyes. "Remember what I told you, Mia," Maria whispered as they stepped into the service elevator. "Stay quiet, don't touch anything, and if anyone asks, you're waiting for your aunt to pick you up." Sophia nodded, but her eyes were already drinking in everything around her. She had never seen anything like this place. The elevator walls were lined with wood that looked like it came from a palace, and even the buttons were made of brushed gold. When the doors opened on the main floor, Sophia gasped softly. The lobby stretched out like a cathedral. Massive windows showed the city lights twinkling below, and expensive artwork hung on walls that probably cost more than her mother made in a year. Leather chairs that looked like they belonged in a movie sat in perfect arrangements, and a reception desk made of black marble dominated the center of the space. "Wow, Mama," Sophia breathed. "People really work here?" Maria smiled sadly. "Yes, baby. Very important people with very important jobs." She paused, watching her daughter take it all in. "But remember, we all have important jobs. Mine is to make sure this place stays beautiful for them." The truth was, Maria hadn't wanted to bring Sophia tonight. School was out for winter break, and her usual babysitter had caught the flu. Her sister was working a double shift at the hospital, and there was nobody else. Maria had called her supervisor, Mrs. Chun, almost in tears. "Please," she had begged, "I can't miss another night. I need this job." Mrs. Chun had been understanding. "Bring her, but keep her out of sight. And Maria? If anyone complains, I didn't know about it." Now, as they rode the elevator up to the executive floors, Maria felt her stomach twist with worry. Sophia was a good kid, but she was also curious about everything. What if she wandered off? What if someone important saw her? The executive floor was a different world entirely. Here, the offices had doors made of frosted glass with names printed in elegant gold lettering. The carpet was so thick their footsteps made no sound. Expensive paintings lined the hallways, and Maria had learned over the years that some of them were worth more than houses. "You can sit here," Maria said, pointing to a small seating area near the elevators. It was tucked away from the main offices, but still within sight of where she would be working. "I'll be cleaning Mr. Peterson's office and the conference room. It should only take about 2 hours." Sophia settled into one of the chairs, pulling out a library book about cars. It was her favorite subject lately. She dreamed of becoming a mechanic. Someday, maybe even designing cars. Her friends at school thought it was weird for a girl to like cars so much, but Sophia didn't care. She loved everything about them, the engines, the designs, the way they moved like metal animals down the highway. As Maria began her work, Sophia tried to focus on her book, but the building around her was too fascinating. She had never been anywhere so fancy. At home, their apartment had second-hand furniture and walls that needed painting. Here, everything looked like it had been chosen by someone with perfect taste and unlimited money. Through the windows, she could see other office buildings, but none of them looked quite like this one. The Whitmore Corporation was special, she could tell. Even the trash cans were made of brushed steel and looked like they cost more than her school backpack. Maria worked methodically, the way she always did. First, she emptied the wastebaskets, then dusted the furniture, and finally vacuumed the carpets. She had gotten good at being invisible over the years. The executives rarely stayed this late, but when they did, they barely noticed her. She was just part of the building, like the air conditioning or the elevator music. Tonight, though she kept glancing toward Sophia, making sure she was still sitting quietly with her book. The girl was being perfect, just like Maria had hoped. She wasn't touching anything or making noise. She was just reading and occasionally looking out at the city lights. What Maria didn't know was that Sophia was also listening. The building wasn't completely empty tonight. She could hear voices from some of the offices, people working late or having meetings. Most of it was boring business talk that she didn't understand, but it made her curious about what kinds of jobs these people had that kept them here so late. From her spot in the chair, Sophia could see part of the main lobby below through the glass railings. Sometimes people walked through, security guards making their rounds or delivery people dropping off packages. It was like watching a play from the balcony seats. The building felt alive, even at night. The elevators hummed softly as they moved up and down. Phones rang occasionally in empty offices. A heating system whispered through the vents. For Sophia, who was used to their quiet apartment where the only sounds were traffic outside and neighbors upstairs, it was like being inside a giant machine. As she watched and listened, Sophia began to imagine what it would be like to work in a place like this someday. Not cleaning like her mother, but having one of those offices with her name on the door. Maybe she could design cars for the company or run meetings in those big conference rooms with the long tables and fancy chairs. Her mother had always told her she could be anything she wanted if she worked hard enough and stayed in school. Looking around at all this luxury, Sophia felt that dream burning brighter in her chest. Someday, she promised herself, she would earn her place in a building like this. Not as someone who cleaned up after others, but as someone who belonged here. What Sophia didn't realize was that in just a few hours, this beautiful building would become the stage for a confrontation that would change everything she thought she knew about the world. Sophia had been sitting in the same chair for nearly an hour, and her legs were starting to feel restless. Her book about classic automobiles lay open in her lap, but she had read the same page 3 times without really seeing the words. The building was just too interesting to ignore. From her spot near the elevators, she could see her mother working diligently in the glass-walled conference room, wiping down the massive table that could seat 20 people. Maria moved with practiced efficiency, making everything spotless. Sophia felt a surge of pride watching her. Her mother worked so hard to take care of them both. The elevator dinged softly, and Sophia looked up to see a security guard step out. He was an older man with kind eyes who nodded at her politely before continuing his rounds. Sophia smiled back, relieved that he didn't seem bothered by her presence. Maybe this wouldn't be so scary after all. As the guard disappeared around the corner, Sophia noticed something she hadn't seen before. The main reception desk on this floor had something glinting under the soft lighting. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she quietly stood up, stretching her legs. Her mother had said not to wander, but the reception desk wasn't really wandering, was it? It was still in the same general area. Sophia walked over slowly, her sneakers silent on the plush carpet. The reception desk was made of the same black marble as the one downstairs, but smaller and more elegant. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase, and the computer monitor was turned off for the night. But there, next to a stack of business cards, was what had caught her eye. Car keys, but these weren't ordinary car keys like the ones her mother carried for their old Honda. These were something special. The key fob was made of polished chrome with intricate detailing, and attached to it was a small metal horse, the kind Sophia recognized from her car books as the symbol for Ford Mustang. Her heart started beating faster with excitement. She looked around quickly to make sure no one was watching, then leaned in closer to examine the keys. They were beautiful, like a piece of jewelry. The metal caught the light and seemed to glow. Sophia had seen pictures of classic Mustangs in her books, and she knew these had to belong to something amazing. Her fingers itched to touch them. She had always been the kind of kid who learned by touching and exploring. When other children were content to look at pictures, Sophia wanted to hold things, to understand how they worked. Her mother often joked that Sophia had been taking apart toys since she could hold a screwdriver. After another quick glance toward the conference room, Where her mother was still working, Sophia gently picked up the keys. They were heavier than she expected, solid and real in a way that made her imagine the powerful engine they belonged to. The horse emblem was raised, and she could feel its tiny details with her fingertip. She closed her eyes for a moment and tried to picture the car. In her mind, she saw a deep blue Mustang with chrome bumpers and racing stripes, the kind of car that sounded like thunder when it started up. Her uncle Roberto had shown her pictures of cars like this when she was younger, before he moved to California. He had promised to teach her about engines someday. The keys felt warm in her small hands, and Sophia found herself imagining what it would be like to actually drive a car like this. Not now, of course, she was only 12, but someday when she was older and had saved enough money to buy her own classic car, she pictured herself pulling into the school parking lot in a restored Mustang, the envy of all her classmates who had dismissed her dreams of working with cars. She turned the keys over carefully, examining every detail. There was a small scratch on one side, probably from years of use. Someone had loved this car enough to carry these keys everywhere, she realized. Someone had probably spent hours polishing and caring for whatever vehicle they belonged to. Sophia wondered who owned them. Was it one of the executives who worked on this floor? Did they drive to work every morning in a beautiful classic car while everyone else was stuck in traffic in ordinary vehicles? The thought made her a little sad, but also hopeful. If someone who worked in this building could afford a car like that, maybe her dreams weren't so impossible after all. As she held the keys, Sophia began to imagine her future differently. Maybe she wouldn't just be a mechanic working on other people's cars. Maybe she could start her own business, restoring classic vehicles for people who appreciated their beauty and history. She could have a garage filled with Mustangs and Camaros and Corvettes, bringing them back to life for owners who understood that cars were more than just transportation. The keys caught the light again as she turned them, and Sophia noticed something else. There was a small engraving on the back of the fob, 1967, in tiny numbers. Her eyes widened. She knew from her reading that 1967 was an incredible year for Mustangs. That was when they made some of the most beautiful and powerful versions ever. She tried to imagine what this particular car looked like. Was it red like the one on the cover of her favorite car magazine? Or maybe black with silver racing stripes? Perhaps it was one of those rare colors she had read about, like Highland green or Acapulco blue, whatever color it was. Sophia was sure it was magnificent. Lost in her daydreams, Sophia didn't notice that her mother had finished cleaning the conference room and was now working in one of the nearby offices. She also didn't hear the elevator doors opening again, or the footsteps approaching across the carpet. The keys felt like magic in her hands, a connection to a world of speed and beauty and freedom that she longed to be part of. For just a moment, holding them made her feel like she belonged in this fancy building, like she was important enough to own something so valuable and special. In her mind, she was already planning how she would save her allowance and birthday money, how she would study hard in school and maybe even get a scholarship to study automotive engineering. These keys represented everything she wanted her life to become: successful, exciting, and full of beautiful machines that she understood better than anyone else. Sophia was so absorbed in her dreams that she didn't realize someone was watching her, someone who was about to shatter her innocent moment of wonder and turn her beautiful daydream into her worst nightmare. The voice that shattered Sophia's peaceful moment came like a thunderclap in the quiet hallway. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Sophia jumped so hard that the keys nearly slipped from her fingers. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she spun around to see a man in an expensive striding toward her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled hair and the kind of confident walk that said he owned whatever space he entered. His face was twisted with anger, and his eyes were fixed on the keys in her small hands. I was just looking," Sophia stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She immediately tried to place the keys back on the desk, but her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped them. "Just looking?" The man's voice rose as he got closer. "You were stealing." I saw you take those keys. No, sir, I wasn't stealing, Sophia said, her eyes filling with tears. I was just looking at them. They're so pretty, and I love cars, and I— Don't lie to me, he shouted, making Sophia flinch. His name was Richard Hartwell, though Sophia didn't know that. All she knew was that this angry man in his expensive suit was treating her like she had committed some terrible crime. Richard worked as a senior account manager at Whitmore Corporation. He had been putting in long hours lately, trying to secure a promotion to director level. The stress was eating at him, and he had been looking for someone or something to take his frustration out on. Finding this young girl with what he assumed were stolen keys felt like the perfect opportunity. Do you have any idea how much those keys are worth? Richard demanded, stepping closer. That's a classic car key, not some toy for little kids to play with. Sophia tried to back away, but the reception desk was behind her. She felt trapped, cornered by this angry man who seemed to tower over her like a giant. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I just wanted to see them. Wanted to see them? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right, and I suppose you just wanted to see the car too? Maybe take it for a little joyride? No, Sophia protested, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I can't even drive. I'm only 12. 12 and already a thief, Richard said coldly. I bet this isn't your first time, is it? How did you even get in here? Did you sneak past security? Sophia shook her head frantically. My mom works here. She's cleaning the offices. I'm waiting for her to finish. Richard's expression grew even uglier. Oh, I see. So the cleaning lady brought her kid to work, and now the kid is going through people's personal belongings. This just gets better and better. The way he said cleaning lady made Sophia's stomach twist. There was such contempt in his voice, like her mother's job was something shameful. Sophia loved her mother and respected the hard work she did. Hearing this man talk about Maria like she was beneath him made something spark angrily in Sophia's chest, even through her fear. My mom is a good person, Sophia said, her voice stronger now despite her tears. She works really hard. I'm sure she does, Richard said sarcastically. Hard enough to raise a daughter who steals things that don't belong to her. I wasn't stealing, Sophia cried. I was just looking. I put them right back. After you got caught, Richard pointed out. Who knows what you would have done if I hadn't shown up when I did. Sophia felt like the world was spinning around her. Nothing she said seemed to matter to this man. He had already decided she was a thief, and nothing she could say would change. His mind, she had never felt so small and helpless in her life. Richard pulled out his cell phone with dramatic flair. I'm calling security, he announced. This building has cameras everywhere. They'll be able to see exactly what you did. Please don't, Sophia begged. I'm sorry. I won't touch anything else, I promise. Too late for promises, Richard said, already dialing. You should have thought about that before you decided to help yourself to other people's property. As he waited for security to answer, Richard seemed to grow more agitated. You know, this is exactly what's wrong with this company, he muttered. We let the cleaning staff bring their kids to work, and this is what happens. Give people an inch, and they take a mile. Sophia didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it made her feel dirty somehow, like she was something unpleasant that had wandered in from the street. She thought about how proud she had felt earlier, imagining herself working in a building like this someday. Now it seemed impossible. How could she ever belong in a place where people looked at her the way this man was looking at her? Yes, this is Richard Hartwell on the executive floor, he said into his phone. I need security up here immediately. I've caught someone going through personal property. Yes, it's a young girl. I don't care how young she is. Theft is theft. Sophia's tears came harder now. She could hear her mother's vacuum cleaner humming in one of the nearby offices, completely unaware of what was happening to her daughter. Sophia wanted to call out for her, but she was too scared and embarrassed. My mom is going to be so upset, Sophia whispered, more to herself than to Richard. She should be, Richard said, ending his call. Maybe next time she'd think twice before bringing her kid to a professional workplace. She didn't have anyone to watch me, Sophia said quietly. My babysitter is sick and my aunt is working. That's not my problem, Richard replied coldly. There are consequences for poor planning. Sophia stared down at her sneakers, wondering how something that had started so beautifully could have gone so wrong. All she had wanted was to look at the keys, to imagine for a moment what it might be like to own something so special. She had never meant to hurt anyone or cause any trouble. The elevator dinged in the distance, and Sophia's heart sank as she realized security was coming. Soon, everyone would know what had happened. Her mother would probably lose her job, and it would all be Sophia's fault for being curious about a pair of car keys. As footsteps approached down the hallway, Sophia closed her eyes and wished she could disappear. She had never felt so ashamed or so afraid in her young life. Maria was wiping down the last window in Mr. Peterson's office when she heard the shouting. At first, she thought it might be coming from the street below or perhaps from another floor. But as the voices grew louder and more distinct, a cold dread began to settle in her stomach. That was Sophia's voice. Maria dropped her cleaning cloth and rushed toward the sound, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. As she rounded the corner near the elevators, she saw a scene that made her blood run cold. Her 12-year-old daughter was pressed against the reception desk, tears streaming down her face, while a tall man in an expensive suit loomed over her, his face red with anger. "Sophia!" Maria called out, rushing toward them. "Mia, what's happening?" Richard turned at the sound of Maria's voice, his expression shifting to one of disgusted satisfaction. "Oh, perfect. Here comes Mama to collect her little thief." "Thief?" Maria's voice cracked as she reached Sophia and immediately pulled her daughter close. Sophia buried her face in her mother's uniform, her small body shaking with sobs. "Sir, there must be some mistake. My daughter isn't a thief." "I caught her red-handed," Richard said, pointing dramatically at the keys still sitting on the reception desk. "She was going through personal property, probably planning to steal those vintage car keys." Maria looked at the keys, then back at Richard, confusion mixing with fear. She was looking at car keys? She was touching them, Richard corrected harshly. "Handling stolen property. Do you have any idea what those keys are worth?" "They belong to a 1967 Mustang Fastback. That car is worth more than you probably make in 5 years." "I'm so sorry," Maria said quickly, her voice desperate. "Sophia loves cars. She reads about them all the time. She was probably just curious. She didn't mean any harm." "Curious?" Richard laughed bitterly. "That's what you're calling it? Your daughter was going through someone else's personal belongings. In my book, that's called stealing." Sophia lifted her tear-stained face from her mother's shoulder. "Mama, I wasn't stealing. I just wanted to see them. They were so beautiful, and I love cars so much. I was going to put them right back." Maria's heart broke seeing the confusion and fear in her daughter's eyes. Sophia was one of the most honest children she knew. The idea that someone would accuse her of stealing was devastating. "Sir," Maria said, trying to keep her voice calm and respectful, "I understand you're upset, but Sophia really wasn't trying to take anything. She's never stolen anything in her life. She's a good girl. She gets straight A's in school, she helps me with everything at home, and she would never—" "Save it," Richard interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "I don't need to hear a sob story about how wonderful your kid is. The fact is, she was caught with property that doesn't belong to her." The elevator dinged, and 2 security guards stepped out. Maria felt her legs go weak as they approached. This was really happening. Her daughter was about to be treated like a criminal, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Here's the situation," Richard said to the guards as they arrived. "I caught this girl going through personal property at the reception desk. She had taken these car keys." He pointed to the keys, which still sat where Sophia had carefully placed them back. "Is that true, miss?" one of the security guards asked Sophia gently. He was an older man with kind eyes, and Maria felt a flicker of hope that maybe he would listen. Sophia nodded miserably. "I picked them up to look at them, but I wasn't going to take them. I just wanted to see what they looked like." "She's 12 years old," Maria added desperately. She can't even drive. What would she want with car keys? Probably planning to sell them, Richard suggested coldly. Or maybe she was casing the place, figuring out what else might be worth taking. Maria felt like she had been slapped. How dare you suggest such a thing? My daughter is not a criminal. Then why is she going through other people's property? Richard shot back. And what is she even doing here in the first place? This is a professional office building, not a daycare center. I brought her because I had no choice, Maria said, her voice breaking slightly. Her babysitter is sick, and I couldn't find anyone else to watch her. I needed to work. I have bills to pay and a daughter to support. That's not my problem, Richard said ruthlessly. Your personal childcare issues don't give you the right to bring unsupervised children into a workplace where they can cause trouble. One of the security guards looked uncomfortable. Sir, if the girl just looked at the keys and put them back, maybe we could— No, Richard said firmly. I want them both removed from the building immediately, and I want it noted in their files that they're not allowed back. Please, Maria begged, feeling panic rise in her chest. Please don't do this. I need this job. I'm a single mother. This is how I support my family. You should have thought about that before you brought your kid to work and let her run wild. Richard replied without an ounce of sympathy. She wasn't running wild, Maria protested. She was sitting quietly with a book. She made one mistake because she's curious about cars. One mistake too many, Richard said coldly. Do you people think you can just do whatever you want? This is a high-end corporate environment, not some charity case where we make exceptions for everyone's personal problems. The way he said, you? People made Maria's face burn with shame and anger. She had worked for this company for 8 years. She had never been late, never called in sick unless it was absolutely necessary, and had always done her job with pride and dedication. But in this man's eyes, she was just cleaning lady whose place in this building was barely tolerated. Sir, Maria tried one more time, if you could just give us another chance. The answer is no, Richard cut her off. Security, I want both of them escorted out, and I want to speak to their supervisor first thing tomorrow morning about better screening procedures for staff. Sophia looked up at her mother with wide, frightened eyes. Mama, are you going to lose your job because of me? Maria's heart shattered completely. She pulled Sophia closer, trying to shield her from Richard's hateful stare. It's not your fault, baby, she whispered. None of this is your fault. But even as she said the words, Maria felt her world crumbling around her. How would she pay rent? How would she buy groceries? What would she tell her supervisor, Mrs. Chun, who had been kind enough to let her bring Sophia in the first place? As the security guards waited awkwardly for instructions, Maria realized that everything she had worked for was about to disappear, because her daughter had been curious about a pair of car keys. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Maria held Sophia close, both of them trembling as Richard continued his verbal assault. The security guard stood nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. One of them, Officer Johnson, had worked in this building for over 15 years and had never seen anyone treat the cleaning staff so harshly. I want them out of here right now, Richard demanded, straightening his expensive tie. And I want a full report filed about this incident. This is exactly the kind of security breach that could cost this company millions if word gets out that we let random people wander around our executive floors. Sophia wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her tears still flowing. Mama, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know looking at keys was wrong. Mia, Maria murmured, stroking her daughter's hair. You didn't do anything wrong. Of course she did something wrong, Richard snapped. She was going through private property. And you enabled it by bringing her here in the first place. Officer Johnson cleared his throat. Sir, maybe we could just file a report and let this go with a warning? The girl seems genuinely sorry, and she did put the keys back. Richard whirled around to face the security guard. Are you kidding me? A warning? This is theft we're talking about. If we let this slide, what message does that send? That anyone can just come in here and help themselves to whatever they want? She's 12 years old, Officer Johnson said quietly, and she wasn't actually trying to steal anything. How do you know that? Richard challenged. How do you know she wasn't planning to come back later? Or maybe she was working with someone else. These people always have some kind of scheme going. The way Richard said, these people made Officer Johnson's jaw tighten. He had been working security long enough to recognize prejudice when he heard it, and this was ugly even by the standards he'd seen before. Just then, the soft ding of the elevator echoed through the hallway. Everyone turned to look as the polished steel doors slid open with a whisper. Richard expected to see more security guards or perhaps another executive who had been working late. What he saw instead was an elderly man in a simple gray suit. The man appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair that was neatly combed but not styled. His suit was well made but understated, the kind that spoke of quality rather than flashiness. He moved slowly but steadily, using a simple wooden walking cane that looked like it had seen many years of use, what Richard didn't notice, but both security guards did immediately, was the way they both straightened up and stepped slightly apart. Officer Johnson's hand moved instinctively to his radio, and his partner, Officer Martinez, actually took a small step backward. "Good evening," the elderly man said in a calm, measured voice. His tone was polite but carried an unmistakable authority that seemed to fill the space around him. Richard barely glanced at the newcomer, too focused on his righteous anger to pay attention to much else. "Excuse me," he said dismissively, "but we're dealing with a security situation here. You'll need to move along." The elderly man paused, tilting his head slightly as he took in the scene before him. His eyes moved from Richard's red face to Maria's tear-stained cheeks, then down to Sophia, who was still clinging to her mother's uniform. His expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes, a sharpening of attention that the security guards recognized immediately. "I see," the man said simply. "And what exactly is the nature of this security situation?" Richard's irritation flared even higher. Who was this old man to question him? "Look, I don't know who you are, but this doesn't concern you. I caught this girl stealing, and I'm having her and her mother removed from the building." "Stealing?" the elderly man repeated, his voice still calm but with a slight edge that made Officer Johnson nervous. "What did she steal?" "My car keys," Richard said, pointing dramatically at the reception desk. "She was going through personal property." The elderly man walked slowly toward the desk, his cane tapping softly on the carpet. He looked down at the keys, then back at Sophia, who was peeking out from behind her mother with wide, frightened eyes. "Your car keys?" the man asked quietly. "That's right," Richard said, puffing out his chest. "Those are the keys to my 1967 Mustang Fastback. It's worth more than most people make in a year. And I caught this little thief red-handed with them." Officer Johnson felt his stomach drop. He knew exactly whose keys those were, and they definitely didn't belong to Richard Hartwell. He caught Officer Martinez's eye and saw the same realization there. This was about to get very ugly, very fast. The elderly man studied the keys for a long moment, then looked back at Richard with an expression that was becoming increasingly difficult to read. "I see, and you're quite certain these keys belong?" "To you! Of course I'm certain," Richard snapped. "Do you think I'm some kind of idiot?" "The thought hadn't occurred to me," the elderly man replied mildly. Maria, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly found her voice. "Sir," she said to the elderly man, "please don't let him have us arrested. My daughter really wasn't trying to steal anything. She just loves cars so much, and she was curious about the keys. She put them right back." The old man turned his attention to Maria, and his expression softened noticeably. "What's your name, dear?" "Maria Rodriguez, sir." "I work in building maintenance. I've been here for 8 years. And your daughter?" "Sophia. She's 12. She wants to be a car designer when she grows up." The elderly man nodded thoughtfully, then looked down at Sophia. "Is that true, young lady? Do you want to design cars?" Sophia nodded shyly, still not completely coming out from behind her mother. "Yes, sir, I love cars. I read about them all the time. I'm sorry I touched the keys. They were just so pretty." Something like a smile flickered across the old man's face. They are pretty, aren't they? What kind of car do you think they belong to? A 1967 Mustang, Sophia said quietly. I can tell from the horse symbol and the date on the back. Richard was getting more agitated by the minute. Look, old man, I don't know what your deal is, but you need to mind your own business. This is a private matter. The elderly man turned slowly to face Richard, and something in his posture changed. The casual friendliness was still there, but underneath it was something much harder and more intimidating. You're quite right, he said quietly. This is indeed a private matter. My private matter? Richard frowned, confusion replacing some of his anger. What are you talking about? The security guards exchanged another look. Officer Johnson was already reaching for his radio, knowing that whatever was about to happen, his supervisor was going to want to know about it immediately. The elderly man smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. Well, you see, there seems to be some confusion about ownership here. You claim these are your keys. They are my keys, Richard insisted. I'm afraid that's impossible, the old man said calmly. You see, those keys belong to me? Richard stared at the elderly man for a moment, his brain struggling to process what he had just heard. What do you mean they belong to you? He asked, his voice rising with disbelief. That's impossible. I left those keys there myself when I came up from the parking garage. The old man reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. His movements were deliberate and calm, as if he had all the time in the world. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, he said quietly. Officer Johnson was now standing at attention, his radio crackling softly as he prepared to make a call. Officer Martinez had moved closer, and both security guards were watching the situation with expressions that had shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. Sir, Officer Johnson said carefully, addressing the elderly man. Should I contact? Not necessary just yet, Johnson, the old man replied without taking his eyes off Richard. Let's see how this plays out first. The fact that the security guard knew the man by name, and that the man knew the guard's name in return, should have been Richard's first clue that something was very wrong with his assumptions. But Richard was too caught up in his own righteousness to notice the subtle signs. Look, I don't know who you think you are, Richard said, his voice getting louder. But you can't just walk up here and claim someone else's property. Those are my keys, and I'm not going to stand here and let some confused old man, Richard. Officer Martinez whispered urgently, stepping closer. Maybe you should stay out of this. Richard snapped at the security guard. I can handle one confused senior citizen. The elderly man opened his wallet with practiced ease and pulled out a driver's license, holding it up so Richard could see it clearly. Perhaps this will help clear up the confusion, he said in that same maddeningly calm voice. Richard squinted at the license, reading the name aloud without really thinking about what he was saying. Robert Whitmore. His voice trailed off as the significance of that name began to sink in. That's right, the old man said, putting the license back in his wallet. Robert Whitmore, Sr. The color drained from Richard's face so quickly that Maria, still holding Sophia, actually took a step forward, thinking he might faint. She didn't fully understand who this man was, but she could see that something monumental was happening. You single quotes re ... Richard's voice came out as barely a whisper. The founder of Whitmore Corporation, Robert finished calmly. Chairman Emeritus. And the owner of those keys you've been making such a fuss about. Officer Johnson was already on his radio, now speaking in low, urgent tones to someone at the security desk downstairs. Officer Martinez had straightened up so much he looked like he was standing at military attention. Richard's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on dry land. The man he had just called a confused old man was the person who had built this entire company from the ground up, whose name was on the building they were standing in. But how ... Richard stammered. How what? Robert asked pleasantly. How did my keys end up on the reception desk? Well, that's simple enough. I was here earlier today showing my grandson around the building. He's about Sophia's age, actually, and he's also fascinated by cars. I must have left the keys on the desk when we stopped to look at some of the artwork in the lobby. Sophia, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, suddenly found her voice. You really own a 1967 Mustang? She asked, peeking out from behind her mother. Robert's stern expression softened immediately when he looked at her. I do indeed, young lady. A Highland Green Fastback with a 390 V8 engine. It was my first car, actually. I bought it used when I was just starting this company. Highland Green, Sophia breathed, her eyes lighting up despite everything that had happened. That's one of the rarest colors, and a 390 V8. That must sound amazing when it starts up. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him since he'd stepped off the elevator. It does indeed. Sounds like thunder rolling across the sky. Richard was still standing there, looking like someone had hit him over the head. With a brick? The full magnitude of what he had done was beginning to sink in. He had just spent the last 20 minutes screaming at the founder of the company, calling his judgment into question and demanding that security remove a 12-year-old girl for touching his property. Mr. Whitmore, Richard began, his voice shaking. I had no idea. I didn't know you were ... Clearly, Robert said, his voice cooling again as he turned his attention back to Richard. You didn't know a lot of things. You didn't know whose keys those were. You didn't know that this young lady was simply admiring them because she shares my passion for classic automobiles. And you apparently didn't know that treating people with basic human decency is more important than making assumptions about their character. Maria was still processing what was happening, but she could see that the balance of power in the room had shifted dramatically. The man who had been terrorizing her daughter was now the one who looked terrified. Sir, Richard. Tried again. I was just trying to protect company property. You thought what? Robert interrupted, his voice sharp now. You thought a 12-year-old girl was planning to steal a car? You thought her mother, who has been working faithfully for this company for 8 years, was running some kind of criminal operation? Richard's face went from pale to red to pale again. I was just being cautious, ... Cautious? Robert repeated. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing it looked more like bullying. It looked like a grown man intimidating a child and her mother based on nothing more than prejudice and assumptions. Officer Johnson approached carefully. Mr. Whitmore, sir, should I have building management prepare an incident report? Robert considered this for a moment, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. Make sure it includes everything that was said and done here tonight. Richard looked like he was about to be sick. An incident report involving the company founder would definitely reach the highest levels of management. His job, his career, everything he had worked for was hanging by a thread. Please, Richard said, his voice barely audible. Mr. Whitmore, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. If you had known it was my property? Robert asked quietly. That's the only reason you would treat people differently? Because of who owns what, or who has more power? Richard opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was trapped, and he knew it. Robert picked up his keys from the reception desk, the metal catching the light as he slipped them into his pocket. You know what the real tragedy is here, Richard? He said quietly. This young lady was genuinely excited about my car. She knew more about it than most of my executives know about their own vehicles. She was dreaming about her future, imagining what she might accomplish someday. And you turned that beautiful moment into a nightmare. The silence that followed Robert's words was deafening. Richard stood frozen, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like it was made of lead. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the building's perfect air conditioning. He had never felt so small. In his entire life, Robert walked slowly to one of the nearby chairs and sat down, his wooden cane resting against his knee. Despite his age, there was nothing frail about him. The authority that radiated from his quiet presence filled the entire hallway. You know, Richard, Robert began, his voice conversational but carrying an undertone that made everyone listen carefully. I've been coming to this building at odd hours for the past few months. Not for meetings or business calls, but just to Observe, Richard swallowed hard but didn't dare interrupt. I've been watching how people treat each other when they think no one important is around, Robert continued. I've seen some beautiful things. I've watched our security guards help elderly visitors find their way. I've seen executives stay late to help younger employees with difficult projects. I've watched our maintenance staff take pride in making this building spotless every single night. Maria felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Maybe this nightmare would have a different ending than she had feared. But I've also seen some troubling things. Robert's voice grew colder. I've seen people treated differently based on their job titles. I've seen employees talked down to because they don't wear expensive suits. I've seen the kind of behavior that makes me ashamed to have my name on this building. By now, word was spreading through the building that something unusual was happening on the executive floor. A few other employees who had been working late began to gather near the elevators, drawn by the commotion and the rumors that were already flying through the building's communication channels. Robert noticed the small crowd forming and nodded to himself, as if this was exactly what he had hoped would happen. Good, he said quietly. I want witnesses for what happens next. Richard's legs felt weak. He glanced around at the growing audience of his co-workers and felt his career slipping away with each passing second. You see, Richard, Robert continued, standing up slowly with the help of his cane, what you've shown me tonight is exactly the kind of behavior that destroys companies from the inside out. You made assumptions about a 12-year-old child based on nothing more than her appearance and her mother's job. You turned a moment of innocent curiosity into an accusation of theft. Sophia was still pressed against her mother's side, but she was listening to every word. Even through her fear and confusion, she could sense that something important was happening. But that's not even the worst part, Robert said, his voice growing stronger. The worst part is how you spoke to this family. The contempt in your voice. When you called Maria a cleaning lady, the way you said you people like they were somehow less human than you are. A murmur went through the gathering crowd. Several people were recording with their phones now, sensing that this was a moment that would be talked about for years to come. Richard tried once more to salvage the situation. Mr. Whitmore, sir, I was just trying to protect company assets. You thought wrong? Robert cut him off firmly. You thought that your position in this company gave you the right to humiliate a child and her mother. You thought that wearing an expensive suit made you better than people who work just as hard as you do, maybe harder. Robert turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to hear this clearly. The way this man has behaved tonight does not represent the values of Whitmore Corporation. It does not represent the kind of people we want working here. Richard's face had gone completely white. He knew what was coming, but he couldn't quite bring himself to believe it was really happening. Richard Hartwell, Robert said, his voice carrying clearly across the hallway. Your employment with Whitmore Corporation is terminated, effective immediately. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Richard swayed slightly as if the words had physically struck him. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings, Robert continued, and then you will be removed from the building. Your access cards and company equipment will be confiscated. Officer Johnson stepped forward, his expression professional but with a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Sir, we'll handle the escort. Richard opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? Everything that had happened was true. There were witnesses and probably security camera footage as well. But sir, Richard finally managed to whisper, my job. My career, ... Your career? Robert's voice was incredulous. You're worried about your career after what you just put this family through? After the way you spoke about a child who was simply admiring a beautiful car? Maria watched in amazement as the man who had seemed so powerful just minutes ago crumbled before her eyes. It was almost hard to believe this was really happening. Let me tell you something about careers, Richard, Robert said, walking closer to the defeated man. Real success isn't measured by the size of your office or the cost of your suit. It's measured by how you treat people, especially those who can't fight back. Robert turned to Sophia, who was watching everything with wide eyes. Young lady, what did you think of those car keys? Sophia looked up at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. They were the most beautiful keys I've ever seen, Sophia said quietly. I could tell just by looking at them that they belonged to something special. They do indeed, Robert smiled warmly. And do you know what makes them even more special? The fact that someone your age can appreciate the history and craftsmanship they represent. He looked back at Richard, his expression hardening again. This child showed more respect for my property in 5 minutes than you showed for basic human dignity in 20 minutes. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Someone in the back was quietly crying, though whether from emotion or relief it was hard to tell. Mr. Whitmore, one of the gathered employees, called out, "What you're doing here? It means everything to those of us who work hard every day." Robert nodded acknowledgement to the speaker. That's exactly why I do what I do. This company was built by people who understood that everyone matters, that every job has dignity, and that how we treat each other is what defines us. Richard was led away by security, his head down and his shoulders slumped. As the elevator doors closed behind him, a sense of justice seemed to settle over the gathered crowd, but Robert wasn't finished yet. He turned back to Maria and Sophia, and his expression became gentle again. Now then, he said, I believe we have some unfinished business to attend to. As the elevator doors closed behind Richard and the security guards, the hallway fell into an almost sacred silence. The crowd of employees who had gathered to witness the confrontation remained perfectly still, as if they were afraid that moving might somehow break the spell of what they had just seen. Robert Whitmore turned his full attention back to Maria and Sophia, and the transformation in his demeanor was remarkable. Gone was the stern authority he had shown toward Richard. In its place was a grandfatherly warmth that seemed to wrap around the frightened mother and daughter like a protective blanket. Maria, he said gently, I owe you and your daughter an enormous apology. Maria blinked in confusion. Sir, you don't owe us anything? You saved us? No, Robert shook his head slowly. I failed you long before tonight. You see, I've been watching this company for months, trying to understand why some departments have such high turnover, why good employees leave, why there seems to be tension in certain areas. What happened here tonight gave me my answer. He walked closer to them, his cane tapping softly on the carpet. You've been working here for 8 years? 8 years of faithful service, and yet you were treated tonight like you didn't belong here. That tells me I haven't been doing my job as a leader. Sophia peeked out from behind her mother, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. This kind old man with the gentle voice was nothing like the angry executive who had scared her so badly. Sophia, Robert said, looking down at her with eyes that crinkled at the corners, I understand you want to be a car designer when you grow up. Sophia nodded shyly. Yes, sir. I love cars more than anything. I read about them every day, and I draw pictures of cars I want to build someday. What kind of cars do you want to build? Robert asked, genuinely interested. Electric ones, Sophia said, her voice growing stronger as she talked about her passion. But ones that still look beautiful, like the old cars. I think we can make cars that don't hurt the environment but still make that wonderful sound when they start up. Robert's eyebrows rose with surprise and delight. Electric cars that capture the soul of classics? That's a fascinating idea. Have you thought about how you might achieve that? Sophia's eyes lit up as she forgot her earlier fear. Well, I was thinking about electric motors that could be programmed to sound like V8 engines, but with different tones for different moods. And the bodies could be made from recycled materials but shaped like the most beautiful cars from the 1960s. The crowd of employees was listening with growing amazement. This 12-year-old girl wasn't just dreaming about cars, she was thinking like an engineer. Incredible, Robert murmured. You know, young lady, some of the best automotive designers in the world work for companies right here in this city. Would you like to meet some of them? Sophia's mouth fell open. Really? You would do that? I would indeed, Robert said with a warm smile. But first, I have something else for you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the vintage Mustang keys. The metal caught the hallway lights and seemed to glow in his weathered hands. Every person in the gathering crowd held their breath as they watched. "These keys," Robert said, holding them up so Sophia could see them clearly, "belong to the very first car I ever owned. I bought that 1967 Mustang when I was 23 years old, and this company was just an idea in my head. I worked 3 jobs to afford it, and I slept in the back seat more nights than I care to remember." Sophia stared at the keys with wonder, as if she was looking at a piece of history. "That car has been with me through everything," Robert continued. "It was parked outside when I signed my first business contract. It carried me to my wedding. I drove my children home from the hospital in that car. And when this company became successful, I could have bought any car in the world, but I kept the Mustang because it reminded me where I came from." The silence in the hallway was so complete that you could hear the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. "Sophia," Robert said, extending the keys toward her, "I want you to have these." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Maria's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Sir, we couldn't possibly," Maria began. "Please let me finish," Robert said. Gently. "Sophia, these keys represent something important. They represent the idea that dreams can come true if you work hard enough and never give up believing in yourself." Sophia looked up at her mother with wide, disbelieving eyes. Maria was crying now, but they were tears of joy and relief rather than fear. "I can't give you the car yet," Robert said with a chuckle. "You're a bit too young to drive, but I want you to keep these keys as a promise. A promise that if you work hard in school, if you keep studying cars and engineering, if you never let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big, then someday that Mustang will be yours to drive." Sophia's hands trembled as she reached out to accept the keys. They felt warm and heavy in her small palms, weighted with history and possibility. "I promise," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise I'll work really hard." "I know." "You will?" Robert said, then turned to Maria. "And now for you, my dear." Maria wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "Sir, you've already done so much. Maria, I've been reviewing personnel files lately, and yours is remarkable. 8 years of perfect attendance. Commendations from 3 different supervisors. Completion of 2 professional development courses on your own time. You've even made suggestions that save the company money on cleaning supplies." Maria blushed, not knowing that anyone had noticed her efforts. "I also know," Robert continued, "that you're a single mother putting yourself through night school to get a business degree. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Maria said quietly. "I want to provide a better life for Sophia." "Well then," Robert said, his eyes twinkling, "I think it's time we helped you with that goal. How would you like to become the new director of facilities management?" The question hung in the air like a perfectly thrown ball waiting to be caught. Maria stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I what?" She stammered. "Director of Facilities Management," Robert repeated. "It comes with a substantial salary increase, full benefits, tuition assistance for your business degree, and an office. Right here on this floor." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Several people were openly crying now, moved by the incredible turn of events they had witnessed. Maria was shaking her head in disbelief. "Sir, I don't understand. Why would you do this for us?" Robert's expression became serious. "Because tonight you both showed me something that money can't buy and titles can't teach. You showed me dignity under pressure. You showed me the kind of character that builds great companies and great lives." He looked around at the gathered employees. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, what happened here tonight is what I want this company to be about. Not about who has the fanciest suit or the most impressive title, but about how we treat each other. About recognizing potential wherever we find it. About building each other up instead of tearing each other down." Sophia clutched the keys to her chest, still hardly believing this was real. The beautiful keys that had started this whole nightmare had become the symbol of her dreams coming true. As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Maria and Sophia to offer congratulations and words of encouragement. The hallway that had been filled with tension and fear was now filled with hope and celebration, and in that moment, As Sophia looked down at the keys in her hands and her mother wiped away tears of joy, everyone in that building truly did hold their breath, not from fear, but from the overwhelming beauty of witnessing kindness triumph over cruelty, and dreams take flight against all odds.